จักรวรรดิมุสทรัมป์อนาคตจะเป็นอย่างไรดำดิ่งสู่การอภิปรายที่ร้อนแรงเกี่ยวกับอิทธิพลของอีลอนมุสในรัฐบาลทรัมป์และผลกระทบต่อประชาธิปไตย
Okay, so looks like a lot of you are fired up about Elon Musk and his role in the Trump administration.
Yeah, seems to be a hot topic.
We've got stacks of articles here, and wow, a ton of comments from you folks. Some people are singing his praises, others are calling him a, well, coup leader.
And quite a few folks are worried about the future of democracy itself.
Definitely seems like we hit a nerve with this one. So we've got excerpts from Tech Dirt, Al Jazeera, Common Dreams, plus all those, shall we say, passionate comments you send in. You ready to dive into this with me?
Absolutely. This is a fascinating situation that's unfolding, and it's clear it's got people thinking deeply about the implications. So yeah, let's see if we can make some sense of it all together.
Right. So the first thing that jumps out from these articles is just how quickly things have changed, right? It feels like overnight we went from Trump's inauguration to, bam, Elon Musk is suddenly the efficiency czar of the government.
It's certainly unprecedented. I mean, this whole DOGE thing, Department of Government Efficiency, it's not something we've ever seen before. And the speed at which Musk has acted, well, it's definitely raised some eyebrows, and not just from one side of the political aisle either.
Yeah, the Al Jazeera article you sent, it really lays this out. In just 2 weeks, his team has managed to, completely freeze USAID's work. Think about the vital aid programs all over the world are just on hold now.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? They've also flagged millions of government employees as redundant. If those layoffs actually go through, we're talking about a massive economic and social impact. I mean, not just for those individuals, but for entire communities.
No wonder some of you are using words like coup and comparing this to, straight-up authoritarian regimes. Tech Dirt and Common Dreams are both painting a pretty bleak picture, They're basically arguing that Musk and Trump are dismantling traditional checks and balances and concentrating power in a way that really undermines, the core principles of democracy.
Yeah, and they're not just making vague accusations. They're pointing to specific actions to back up their claims, like removing security officials who were just following established classification protocols. That raises some serious concerns about who's actually in control of sensitive information now.
Right, and then there's this whole thing about private citizens suddenly having access to Treasury systems. I mean, that's not something to take lightly. That's the kind of thing that keeps, cybersecurity experts up at night.
Absolutely. It raises big questions about transparency and accountability and, well, basic security. And those concerns are only amplified by the fact that all of this is happening without any real oversight from Congress. That's a key part of our system of government that seems to be getting bypassed here.
What I find interesting is that even some of the comments we got from people who, generally support Trump, they're expressing some unease about this. They might have voted for change, but this feels like something different,
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the situation goes beyond the usual partisan divides. We're talking about the fundamental principles of governance, like the very nature of power itself.
Speaking of power, one of your comments specifically mentioned Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's calling this a plutocratic coup, which is, a pretty loaded term. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's definitely a strong statement, but I think it reflects this growing concern that we're seeing a shift toward a system where wealth equals power, where billionaires like Musk can basically just dictate policy without being accountable to the traditional democratic processes.
So we've got this one group that's deeply concerned calling it a coup, but then we've also got a lot of comments pushing back against that narrative. What are those folks saying?
Well, they're basically arguing that this is exactly what people voted for, right? A shakeup of the system, a drain on the swamp, all that. They see the government as this, loaded, inefficient machine, and they believe drastic measures are needed to cut waste and streamline operations.
Yeah, and some even see Musk's involvement as a good thing. They believe he's a brilliant innovator who can, bring some much-needed change to a stagnant bureaucracy. They basically trust him to make the right decisions, even if those decisions seem a little unconventional.
So we have a real clash of perspectives here. On one hand, you've got those who see this as a dangerous erosion of democratic norms. And on the other, you have those who believe it's a necessary correction, a way to make government, actually work better for the people.
Which is where it gets tricky for a lot of folks, right? Trying to figure out where you stand on all this. Is this a legitimate attempt to improve government, or is there something well, more sinister at play.
It's a question we all need to grapple with. What I find fascinating is how this situation forces us to re-examine our assumptions about, well, about power, about democracy, about the role of technology in our lives.
Absolutely. And to really understand what's at stake here, I think we need to dig into some specific examples of the actions that are causing all this concern. Go beyond the headlines and the rhetoric and really look at what's actually happening.
Yeah, you're right. Let's get into the details and see if we can uncover the real story here.
So we've got these two very different ways of looking at things, power grab versus, much needed change. And to help us sort this out, there was that example you flagged in the Tech Dirt article, the one about those security officials being removed.
Oh, right.
For, actually, get this, following classification protocols. That seems a little backwards? No.
It does seem counterintuitive, right? I mean, this system is designed to protect sensitive information. And removing the very people who are upholding those safeguards, well, yeah, it's definitely concerning. It makes you wonder, what are the new rules here, and who are they actually benefiting?
And it's not just about security protocols either. You also pointed out that section in the Al Jazeera article about private citizens being given access to treasury systems. That's a pretty huge risk, right? I mean, that's got to be the kind of thing that keeps cybersecurity experts up at night.
Oh, absolutely. Giving unauthorized individuals access to those systems, I mean, we're talking about sensitive financial data here. It's incredibly risky.
Yeah.
Opens the door to all kinds of potential problems, abuse, fraud, even sabotage. And the lack of transparency around all this just makes it even more worrying.
One of the comments you sent in really stuck with me. It was about the removal of Phyllis Fong, the Inspector General of USI.
Ah, yes.
Apparently, she was removed without properly notifying Congress, which is, well, that's actually a violation of the law.
That's a really important point to bring up. Inspectors General, they're supposed to be these independent watchdogs, right? They make sure that government agencies are held accountable. So removing them without following the proper procedures, it undermines that whole oversight function. And it suggests, well, a disregard for the rule of law, which is, not exactly a hallmark of healthy democracies.
Right. So we're seeing these very specific examples of actions that, well, they don't really line up with the whole making government more efficient and accountable idea. It's starting to feel like maybe there's something else going on here, something a little more, deliberate. And maybe even, well, some of your comments use the word shadowy.
Yeah, I think shadowy is a pretty fair assessment. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines, right? But when you zoom out a little, when you look at the bigger picture, there's definitely a pattern emerging here. And it's a pattern that's setting off alarm bells for a lot of people, including some folks who are usually pretty supportive of the administration.
Exactly. And one comment even used the phrase institutional capture, which sounds pretty intense. What does that actually mean in this context?
So institutional capture, basically it means that powerful individuals or maybe groups are able to exert too much influence over government institutions, right? They bend them to their will, they use them to serve their own interests instead of, the interests of the public good.
So are you saying that this is what's happening here, that Musk and his allies are basically capturing these institutions for their own benefit?
Well, it's certainly a possibility we have to consider. The Common Dreams article you sent, it really delves into this idea. It suggests there's a bigger strategy at play here. They call it a three-pronged aim.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are those three aims?
So aim number one is what they call oligarchic state capture, which is basically what we were just talking about. Allowing a small group of wealthy individuals to essentially control the levers of power in the government.
And we're already seeing hints of that with Musk's influence over DOGE, right? I mean, he's basically operating without any real checks on his authority.
Right. And that leads to the second aim, which is the promotion of what they call white Christian nationalism. This idea that America should be defined by a very specific set of religious and cultural values, often at the expense of, other groups.
Which is, that's a pretty controversial idea.
Yeah.
And yet it seems to be gaining some traction these days. We're definitely seeing a lot more rhetoric that, demonizes certain groups and pushes this narrow view of what it means to be American.
And that actually ties into their third aim, which is the pursuit of, and this might sound a little dramatic, but they actually call it a new American empire. And this could involve, economic coercion, maybe even military force. They even mention things like, get this, gaining control of the Panama Canal and purchasing Greenland. Sounds like something out of, a geopolitical thriller.
Hold on. Purchasing Greenland. Is that even a real possibility? I mean, it sounds more like something from a political satire.
Well, it's certainly a bold idea. And it highlights the kind of thinking that's going on here. What the article argues is that this new empire, it wouldn't necessarily rely on traditional military conquest. It would be more about economic dominance, technological superiority, the ability to, well, basically dictate terms to other nations.
Okay, so we've got these three interconnected aims: oligarchic state capture, white Christian nationalism, and a new American empire. If that's really the goal here, well, it paints a pretty disturbing picture of the future.
It does raise some pretty profound questions, right? What kind of society are we building if these trends continue? What happens to our democracy, our values, our place in the world?
These are huge EE questions. And I gotta admit, it can feel a little overwhelming, right? Like we're just along for the ride, and we don't have any agency.
I get that. But it's important to remember that even when things seem really bleak, individuals still have the power to make a difference.
But how? What can one person really do to counter these massive forces?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive, because you sent in a lot of comments from people who are wrestling with that exact question. They're trying to figure out how to respond, how to resist, how to, create the future they want to see.
It's easy to get overwhelmed with all this talk about, oligarchy and nationalism and empires. Kind of makes you feel like a little rowboat in a hurricane.
Yeah, I can see that.
But looking through your comments, there's this thread of, okay, but what can we do about it? And honestly, that gives me some hope.
Yeah, I get that. It's tempting to just give in to the doom and gloom. But history is full of examples of people who, against all odds, they made a real difference. And just the fact that you're all sending in this stuff, that you even want to understand what's going on, that's a form of engagement right there.
True. Knowledge is power, or at least the first step, right?
Yeah.
But then what? Where do we go from there? A lot of the comments mentioned, the obvious one, voting. That's the most basic way to make your voice heard.
Oh, absolutely. Voting is crucial. It's like the foundation of any democracy. But it's not just about voting in those big national elections, right? Local elections, school board elections, those are all important too. They're all places where you can actually shape the direction of your community.
A bunch of you also talked about contacting your elected officials, letting them know what you're concerned about, holding them accountable. Do you think that actually makes a difference?
It can, especially if it's done, consistently and you put some thought into it. I mean, remember, these folks are supposed to represent you, the people who elected them. So when they hear from a lot of people about a specific issue, it does make an impact. Maybe it doesn't change their vote on a certain bill, but it can definitely influence their approach to policymaking overall.
And then there's social media, right? Some folks were really fired up about using Twitter and platforms like that to spread awareness, maybe organize protests, build a movement.
Social media can be powerful, that's for sure. It's a great tool for getting people mobilized, raising awareness. But it's also important to be careful about the information you're getting, and what you're sharing. It's easy to get sucked into these echo chambers, these filter bubbles, where you only see stuff that, confirms what you already believe. So it's really important to try and engage with different viewpoints, challenge your own assumptions, and be wary of misinformation.
There was one comment that really stuck with me. It talked about focusing on local action. Getting involved with organizations in your community, supporting local journalism, even just building relationships with people who maybe see things differently than you do.
I love that. It's so true. A lot of times change starts at the grassroots level. By getting involved in your community, you can create positive change right where you are. You build connections with people from different backgrounds, and you foster this sense of shared purpose.
So it sounds like there's not really one right answer to the whole "what can we do" question. It's more about, finding the approach that speaks to you as an individual and then using your own skills and passions to make a difference.
Exactly. Some people might be drawn to activism and protests. Others might prefer working behind the scenes.